I knew you when how old were you when you first moved up to Gainesville into the house we shared with all the rest?
I was like 19.
Okay.
20.
I feel like around that time you were clean shaven and you looked a lot like young Neil.
Young Neil.
Movie.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Scott Pilgrim.
Nope. No, you do not look like Michael Cera. You looked like young Neil. Now, not at every angle, but like when young Neil first showed up on camera, I was like, holy shit, it's like back in time for James.
That's awesome. I feel like you didn't even know me for that long with longer hair, too. That's awesome that you remember that.
Yeah, that hairstyle, too, right? You had something kind of similar going on?
Similar, yeah. Kind of longer, but yeah, that kind of like swooshed over look.
Anyway, to point that out.
That's hilarious.
I told my wife, Annalisa, about it, and she was like, what are you talking about? So I don't know if anybody else will agree with me or not.
That's awesome. I like that. Welcome to episode 173 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week we discuss Edgar Wright's 2010 film, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I'm so excited to cover Edgar Wright.
We're finally here.
Honestly, this is one of those filmmakers, like I look at so many that don't necessarily usually do adaptations.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, oh man, I'd love to talk about these filmmakers because they, helped shape me.
Has he done any other adaptations? I don't think so, right? He almost did Ant-Man, which I'm sure is a whole thing.
I don't think anything else, but he, Running Man coming up is a Stephen King adaptation.
Yeah,
so
you're right. Yeah,
definitely going to cover that.
We just talked about that. Yeah, I would love to cover that.
Yeah,
definitely looking forward to it.
So this filmmaker, just to like jump into it really quickly, is one that I point to. He's a person that I respect enormously. I would like to emulate a similar career, the style, the way that he approaches the things that he loves, and genre specifically. Everything he does I'm infatuated with. He puts out playlists every year that I'm always like learning new music from, like literally just like his taste in music, his taste in everything I'm just such a big fan of. So I'm just a big, massive fan here. So, like,
so you're not biased at all.
I'm not biased at all. But yeah, like a movie like Shaun of the Dead. When Shaun of the Dead hit, it immediately jumped up the list of my favorite movies of all time. And like it still very, very much is. He is someone who I've pointed to multiple times in my life as like, this is my favorite filmmaker. Now, like I've said before, this isn't necessarily my favorite film of his, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, but I do appreciate it and I love it a lot because it is an Edgar Wright film, and the way that he handles the craft and pushes forward the medium is just like, he's one of those people that I'll watch anything he makes. And Tarantino and he had like a 3-hour conversation on the Empire podcast recently, basically just about like lesser known films and
I should check that out.
Some other stuff like that. And I listened to all of it and it felt like it went by in like 15 minutes and I wanted more. Enormous respect for the guy. So I'm excited to jump into this. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I want to know your thoughts right off the bat. We just got done reading the comics and then went into the film. What did you think?
I talked about in the last episode how I really went through a journey with the comics. I started out like kind of disliking them. At the very least, I was very, lukewarm towards them. And then over time, they grew on me. And I really thought by the end, it ended on a fairly special note. And the last, I think, 2 issues in particular were very good. I had some interesting kind of similar experiences watching this movie. Really, really like hot and cold, like things that I just loved. Like I was having so much fun with. And then things that left me so cold. And it's interesting because like sometimes it was changes, but sometimes it was taking something from the comic and making it like real and having a real person do it on screen made it worse for me in some ways. Some of the like problematic elements they just get worse, like seeing real people do them in a way. And I don't know, there's just certain things. So like it's going to be a weird movie for me to talk about because of how strongly I feel like this has greatness in it, and then also has stuff that just really doesn't hold up, and beyond that just isn't very good too. And it's going to be like a really mixed bag review for me, but I'm excited to talk about it because I definitely had a blast watching it, because everything you were talking about, like the filmmaker behind it, the decisions, the editing, it's just so smart, so clever, so fast. Everything about it is like crafted to such detail that you have to appreciate that. It's just like some of the stuff with the story itself I struggle with.
Yeah. I think even if this isn't a story that you click in with, like, you do understand the level of filmmaking that's happening here.
Yeah.
And I think upon repeat viewings and stuff, I've seen more and more of that. And the amount of planning that goes into this. I mean, he's known for his transitions. And to make that seamless, you have to know well beforehand exactly how those things are going to cut together in the edit. And to be able to pull them off, basically every scene is a transition in some interesting, creative way that you won't see coming. And just those are small things that all build on each other, like the transitions, the ways that he does everything. Like, he does a lot of effects practically in camera. There will be, I mean, a lot of the stunt choreography and stuff. Like, you can tell this one was his sort of like fighting combat movie.
There was a lot of stunt work in this movie that I did not remember just how much stunt work.
Yeah, and it's impressive. Like I think people become desensitized to fight scenes in movies after a while, and there's a lot of like we've talked about it endlessly on the podcast, but there's a lot of fight scenes that are just like quick cuts and punch here, and you don't really see the details of what's happening. And there's a little bit of that in this movie to keep it sort of moving along. But there are also fight scenes and choreography that you see in here that are absolutely insane. That are long,
and you can see the moves. Yeah,
exactly.
You know for sure. And talking about his transitions just made me think about how, much like Tarantino and I'm sure other filmmakers, it seems like he takes every opportunity to do something interesting and unexpected, and he finds them in moments that other filmmakers try and like not draw attention. It's very much like, I don't want you to realize you're watching a movie. I'm gonna like make this natural and almost invisible. Whereas the other side of that is no, I'm gonna do something incredibly stylish. I'm gonna do something that draws attention to itself. And I'm sure there's a bit of both, but like a lot of time these transitions are notable because they draw attention to themselves so much.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to movies, right? Movies themselves like are larger than life in certain ways. And like to lean into that, I think, is to embrace and celebrate what movies are, is like they are in every way. You're literally watching someone who's 10 times the size of you on a screen in a movie theater sometimes, and the drama that goes into it sometimes. And obviously the other thing we haven't mentioned is that a lot of his films are specifically comedic and like satirical, and like they are
funny.
They're funny, but they're also like taking a genre or taking a certain aspect of certain genres and saying like, look how much we love these. And that's I don't want to call it like parody, and I don't want to call it like a send up, because it's not poking fun at it. It's like doing it lovingly. It's like a love letter to these different genres.
You're talking about like Hot Fuzz to action movies, and
right? Or like Shaun of the Dead to zombie.
Are you saying that this movie is doing that too in a way?
Yeah, almost with like your video game movies, your that whole culture in general, like the way that like this is a video game. He wanted to create a film that was a video game, so a lot of the like the way over the top, even
and it's also that like young adult romance, very male focused, but and obviously wish fulfillment, all that stuff is going on. But yeah, I mean, it could be kind of seen as a send up of that, I guess, too. But you have to point back to the comic and say that really so much of the DNA of this movie comes directly from the comic.
And I think he was drawn to that because of it, right? Yeah. Like he read it and he was like, this is something that speaks to me and something that I can, that's in my wheelhouse, that I think I can definitely, do something with.
Yeah. And for the most part, even though there are some significant changes, the attention to detail in being faithful to the comic really astounded me too. Like how often I recognized exact panels and exact scenes from the comic where every character was positioned in exactly the same way and the set design was done in exactly the same way. And even the little black box might pop up in the exact same spot that it was in the comic. Like there was so much of that it was incredible, and it really showed a respect for the source material that I thought was pretty notable.
And to go back to something that you said, the way that he finds a movie is supposed to be interesting, right? It's not supposed to be typically. It's not depending on what you're trying to do. A movie like he's trying to make isn't supposed to be a lockdown camera situation where we're just watching things play out. Yeah. As if we're watching theater.
If you're watching like a really serious drama where it's all about immersion, then yeah, these like really fun transitions might not be appropriate. In fact, they might distract from the drama of the moment, right?
Moments to find reasons to move the camera, moments to find reasons to have a matching scene transition, moments, I find this to be so interesting. And that's the planning, like I've said before, that goes into his films, and the way that he goes in with such a singular vision that like he knows what the actor needs to do in terms of like how they need to be standing and moving throughout the scene. He knows what they need to say. And I was reading that like people have talked about there's not a lot of improv on his sets because it is so meticulously plotted and set out, to the point that like in order to make that scene transition work, or in order to make that sight gag or sound gag, which he loves, by the way, sight, like things happening, entering frame, things like sound effects, things that he can do practically in camera. I noticed a lot of times there would be like lighting shifts where it would just be like you could tell that like they were in some sort of set, and then like there was this transition where the band was all together, and then the lights all go down, and you could tell that it's like all the lights that were lighting the scene, just they turn them off practically. And like that's the coolest way to like transition into another scene. Like that's what movies are about.
He's finding these moments to do something creative, do something different. Like how can I take this transition and make it something that's either something people haven't seen before, or at least something interesting. And right. Yeah, he really I mean, and there's lessons to be learned, I think, for any sort of, artistic endeavor. As a writer, I'm thinking about like, what can I do? What could I do to find things like that in writing? I think of people like Kurt Vonnegut, or there are certain writers out there who get really playful with their prose and with their way that they might break out of conventions. And it's a difficult thing to do well, but those who do it really well, it can be really fun.
Yeah, and that's the notable thing, right? It's like level of difficulty is like some people might miss it, but the people who understand what's going on, they understand the level of difficulty is high because if it's slightly off, it doesn't work. And it's like, and then you're better off basically just sticking to the norm at that point. But in some way, he's able to thread the needle so many times throughout this movie that you're just like, oh my God, like it all, coalesces to become a style, right? Like this is Edgar Wright's style. He's found ways to, in similar ways to someone like Wes Anderson, the way that you'll think about like he's gonna have those shots that are extremely symmetrical. He's gonna have the dollhouse scenes where like we're going room to room and it's all very like structured and like they've created styles for themselves that are like completely, right away whose film you're watching. And again, I don't think that's an easy thing to do, especially like in today's day and age. And Edgar Wright he's an encyclopedia of film. And I think that's another notable thing that I love to see in certain filmmakers is like the way that the students of film are the ones who can, I think, continue the art form and continue to change things, and create new styles and everything like that. But this movie, overall, I really, really enjoy it. I think there are problems like you mentioned as well. Especially like things that were norms for the time that we talked about with dialogue and things like that in the comic that then, are directly quoted in this movie tend to feel a little more abrasive when we're hearing people say it. And, I don't know. It's tough to be like, oh no, it was just of a time, because it's like it wasn't
10 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. Right?
It wasn't that long ago, and it just seems some of it just seems like
it was, but it wasn't. Like there's a lot that has happened in 10 years, but it's not like it's of a completely different era,
right? So yeah, some of it's like you can't really forgive it, and you just look at it and you're like, well, this is part of this movie at this point.
Well, and I don't know. I have a lot to say more about this, so I guess I'm going to hold it for later. But I do also want to say that I do have some criticisms for more like Edgar Wright direction stuff that happens at the end. It's not just that. So I'll be interested to talk to you about it when we get there. But I don't want to get into it now because I know I'll delay us talking about his like biography and stuff. So let's focus on that.
Yeah, let's move into Edgar Wright as a filmmaker and talk about him in general, because we have been already. Edgar Wright is an English film director, screenwriter, and producer. He is known for his fast-paced and kinetic satirical genre films, which feature extensive utilization of expressive popular music, Steadicam tracking shots, dolly zooms, and a signature editing style that includes transitions, whip pans, and wipes. He began making independent short films before making his first feature film, A Fistful of Fingers, in 1995. Wright created and directed the comedy series Asylum in 1996, written with David Walliams. After directing several other television shows, Wright directed the sitcom Space, 1999 to 2001, which aired for 2 series and starred frequent collaborators Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. Now, if you haven't seen Space, I highly recommend it.
I'm actually surprised Simon Pegg wasn't in this movie somewhere.
Yeah, right. He's in a lot of them, but
yeah.
It's cool. The ones that they have collaborated on as well. He tends to be a writing partner with Edgar, and that's something else that I learned is that he really favors having writing comedies with partners, writing partners and stuff, because writing comedy in a vacuum to him, I think, feels very like it's tough. It's already a tough thing to do, but to do it by yourself.
Yeah, I don't know how people do it, honestly. Writing comedy is really tough. Some people just have a knack for it, some people don't. And I can totally understand wanting to have someone to bounce ideas off of and like figure out what's actually going to be funny. Because I don't know about you, but if I try and write something funny, after I've read it about 5 times, it doesn't matter how fucking funny it might have been at the beginning, it's no longer funny. And it's really hard to like maintain that belief, like, no, this will be funny when it comes out.
And speaking from experience, like, I've directed a film in school, right? So wrote things in a script with people that I thought was hilarious, and then as we get closer, they feel a little less funny, but I'm like, still got to roll with it, got to trust the gut. And then you get there on the day and you're like, these are just inside jokes that aren't funny to anybody but us. And you shoot it, and then like people see it and they're like, that was awkward, I didn't really understand that. And it's very, very tough thing to do, and like
it's tough to know what's going to land with your audience, right?
It really is. Like to know what's funny, really, to be like, that is funny. And I think that's something else about Edgar is like, there is funny and then there's like clever, and I think he plays a lot with both, right? Like some of the jokes might not necessarily be of your taste, but they're typically really clever. And I think that like there's an appreciation that you can have for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's one of the things that this comic lends itself, because the comic is incredibly clever and incredibly funny. Yeah. And so much of that he just like lifts from the comic and finds a way to, and to his credit, finds a way to put it on screen in a very faithful way that you just don't see in many comic book movies. I've seen some people call this one of the greatest comic book movies ever made. And I think it's for that reason. Like his ability to take stuff right off the page and put it on screen is really almost unparalleled. I know we've seen a lot of comic book movies, so I don't want to speak too broadly, but this was early on before the craze really took off.
Yeah, and I think in terms of adapting something, like understanding the essence of the story, understanding like what the impetus of the story is, like why tell this story, and like the reasons why people like us respond to these movies and these elements and these references that they're making and all this stuff, is like he has that. And going in, I think that's important, because you've seen superhero movies where people clearly thought that it was just about somebody punching somebody, and it's not the case.
Do you have some like background on the making of this movie? Because I'm always curious, like how much Bryan Lee O'Malley might have been involved, or was this purely just Edgar Wright's vision?
I don't know specifically how much he was involved, but I do know that he was involved. And we saw some drawings in the film, like you could see some animation and stuff that shows up, and Bryan Lee O'Malley was involved with some of that. But then I guess they also brought in other animators to sort of help as well.
Yeah, the art looked like it was lifted right out of the comics.
Yeah, and Bryan Lee O'Malley has said the people that they brought on, he approves. He thought that they really captured his style and did a great job with it.
Interesting.
Where it wasn't him. I have a bunch of stuff if you want to know sort of some of the behind the scenes stuff, but I think a lot of it goes towards like specific scenes. So I do want to say one thing. Edgar Wright obtained permission to use the famous theme music from the SNES game, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, by writing a letter to Nintendo saying that it is considered to be the nursery rhyme of this generation. Several sound effects from the game can also be heard throughout the scenes in Scott's band practice room.
Is that what is playing at the opening, like the very opening of the film?
I think so, but I can't remember. There's the scene where he goes into like his old high school, and that specifically is when that's playing. He goes through a doorway, and then Ramona's in there. She's like skating or something, I think, and that's like that specific. It's like okay. Do you remember that part? Like, do you remember the song?
Okay, I think so. Yeah, there must be a different because there was like an 8-bit music style music playing at the very opening when it was like still doing the like logos for the movie.
Oh, that was the Universal. That's the Universal music.
Okay, they just made it 8-bit.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, because it sounded really cool, and I was like, man, I love like a really stylized, intro, and like I think even the logo was all pixelated, which was really cool.
Yeah, that was a decision that Edgar Wright made, and I did read that like his brother helped work on that specific sequence to like make it 8-bit and stuff. So that's kind of cool that he was able to bring him in as well.
That's neat.
I found out that the first draft of this script for the film was completed after only 2 of Bryan Lee O'Malley's 6 Scott Pilgrim books were drawn.
Wow. Okay, that was one of the things I wanted to find out about, because I know that the final issue came out around the same time. Did you say this movie was 2010 or 11?
Yeah, 2010.
Yeah, so that's the same year the final issue came out.
So clearly, Bryan Lee O'Malley was heavily involved with being like, this is how I'm going to end this.
And that's probably why the ending we can talk about later. There's 2 different versions of the ending, and the ending is where it kind of differs the most from the comics, and it is reflective of the fact that he didn't have like a finished final comic to really go off of, even though I have heard that they were in conversation about it, but it wasn't done yet.
Yeah. And this, we talked about how this comic was sort of this idea of people starting to create things that were also referencing all this culture that we loved. And I think like this movie, it came out in like 2010, and I don't think it gets necessarily enough credit for. I think it's a little underrated, is what I mean to say. I think like people.
Well, it didn't do well, right? It didn't do well in theaters, and then it's become kind of a cult classic since then. I feel like it's had a resurgence of sorts. But yeah, I can see why you might say that. But some of the stuff we're going to talk about later is, I think, holding it back, though.
Agreed.
It's got very dated views on masculinity and on dating in general. Sexuality. So I think some of that holds it back. Like, it's not going to be as embraced as it otherwise would be.
And again, I do think that, like, I just remember what it was like for me in that time period. And I do think it rings pretty true. And I'm not trying to excuse anything that Edgar or Bryan Lee O'Malley was doing with the story, because it doesn't hold up today. It's, it just really doesn't. It was, I don't know, it was like that at the time in my experience. Like I saw a lot of this like misogyny and like toxic masculinity and like sexuality, like shaming.
It's like a different form of toxic masculinity too, though, because it's not like what people typically associate with that. But when I say that, I mean that the sexuality is presented as sort of transactional throughout the movie. By the basis of the film is that he has to fight these guys to like win Ramona, reducing her into a prize, and that problem is even worse in the film than I would say in the comics. And not only that, but like even sex with Ramona and others becomes sort of transactional. It's like he does things to like earn it from women, and it's like a sort of currency that they have that they can like give out or withhold. And that is just really, I think a lot of people have noticed that this is a very toxic thing in our culture that has led to a lot of problems. And this movie is kind of all about it. So, you kind of have to get over that to enjoy it. I will say just briefly, I watched with my wife, and she immediately was turned off by this movie, by Scott Pilgrim in general, which he's terrible in this movie as a person. And it really never came back around on it in the way that I thought she might. She just really didn't. So, that could definitely be people's experience too.
Yeah, I mean, and I get that. Yeah, we'll talk about the ending when we get there, but I do think like there's some of it wasn't really the payoff that I think a lot of people were hoping for, and I don't know if it's the movie or if it's the comic or what ultimately it entails, but it's almost like all these people went through so many things and so much, and then very quickly things start to turn to the better, and you're like, do we really believe that these characters are going to be better people for the rest of their lives?
It is very abrupt. It is a very abrupt. But yeah, we got to save some of that. Actually, before you get into anything else, though, we almost forgot. Shout out to Stephen E., who commissioned this. He is actually one of the last commissions we're ever going to do, because we have closed our Jukebox Hero tier and we've replaced it with different tiers. And now we're moving away from like a single commission to more communal. So we're finishing up this, and then we're moving into our communal commission next week. Our voting on our first ever poll on Patreon just completed, and we're going to be doing Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Obviously the film the week following. So look forward to that, and check out our Patreon if you want to vote on future polls.
It's not to say we won't ever do a commission again. If you want to throw like a few Bitcoin our way, we might think about it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we have a price, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I'm excited to like I said before, I'm excited for everyone to vote together, and I think it'll lead to some interesting projects. I'm excited. Yeah. So let's get into the plot of this movie. Scott Pilgrim versus the World. In Toronto, 22-year-old Scott Pilgrim is a bassist for his unsuccessful indie garage band Sex Bob-omb. He is dating Knives Chow, a 17-year-old high school student, to the disapproval of his friends in the band, his roommate Wallace Wells, and his younger sister Stacy Pilgrim. Scott meets an American Amazon.ca delivery girl, Ramona Flowers, after having seen her in a dream. He loses interest in knives, but does not break up with her before pursuing Ramona. When Sex Bob-omb plays in a battle of the band sponsored by record executive Gideon Graves, Scott is attacked by Ramona's ex-boyfriend, Matthew Patel. Scott defeats Patel and learns that in order to date Ramona, he must defeat her remaining 6 evil exes.
I want to focus on just a weird little part that I found hilarious. We'll see if you agree with me. I have a feeling you won't, but I knew you how old were you when you first moved up to Gainesville into the house we shared with all the rest?
I was like 19.
Okay.
20.
I feel like around that time you were clean shaven, and you looked a lot like young Neil.
Young Neil.
Movie.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Scott Pilgrim.
Nope. No, you do not look like Michael Cera. You looked like young Neil. Now, not at every angle, but like when young Neil first showed up on camera, I was like, holy shit, it's like back in time for James.
That's awesome. I feel like you didn't even know me for that long with longer hair, too. That's awesome that you remember that.
Yeah, that hairstyle, too, right? You had something kind of similar going on?
Similar, yeah. Kind of longer, but yeah, that kind of like swooshed over look.
Anyway, to point that out.
That's hilarious.
I told my wife, Annalisa, about it, and she was like, what are you talking about? So I don't know if anybody else will agree with me or not.
That's awesome. I like that. Yeah, I mean, so to start out this movie, I did read a couple of things. So I think it's really cool sort of like prologue that opens up, right? And we get the band together and they're playing music, and then that's when like Knives Chow is like falling in love with the band and everything. And then we get this shot where it like pulls back really far and this room is like super extended, and we land on young Neil and Knives Chow looking at the band, and then the title sequence, the title comes in, and like that's just awesome. Like that's just what a cool way to start your movie. And I also read in my research that originally the film only had a title card at the beginning. It was Quentin Tarantino who suggested Edgar Wright late in the stage of post-production that there should be a pre-title credit sequence. Otherwise, the remaining ensemble of characters yet to be introduced would have been introduced in a much more rapid succession. The audience might have been overwhelmed with the introduction of characters and plot. With a pre-title sequence, the audience is given a chance to relax, have a firmer grip on the beginning of the film. Wright considered this and agreed, liking the idea that the first scene now be a prologue. So like having the title cards with the names and everything and the age and like all, it's very much akin to the comic where that's how we were introduced to them. But I think that sequence plays out really nicely. And that leads me to my first point with the music in this movie. Like they're supposed to suck, but like a lot of the stuff I think is either really funny or really good. Like I just I think it's awesome.
I feel like the band was way worse in the comics, but I mean, you don't want to make people listen to bad music throughout a whole movie, especially when you have so many opportunities to have cool scenes with cool music. So you're not going to do that.
Like Kim, just the 1, 2, 3, 4, it just stays stuck in my head, and then the way that the guitars come in and everything, like, it makes me think of Scott Pilgrim.
We are Sex Bomb. She just screams it at the top of her lungs. I love how it always interrupts somebody. Which in the movie, like every time she does it, it cuts somebody off. So perfect. Again, another character who shines in such little time she has, but I really she was my favorite character in the comics we talked about in the last episode. So I did appreciate her more in the movie just because we are able to get some of that, but it is kind of a shame how much you have to leave out.
So with the introduction of like a lot of these characters, a lot of their introductions are fun. I love the way that he plays with like phone conversations and the way that like things play off each other, but the introduction of Ramona and like this party that he's at, and the way that there are people in the background who are like really like snobby about like comic books, or really snobby about like music that they're listening to. Like there's one character at one point who's like their first album is really much better than their first album, and like
I heard that line. I was like, what the fuck is that talking about? But
stuff like that I think is hilarious.
I think it's the same guy. I think that one guy is like, I forget what his name is, but he's
dropping
several.
some awesome lines out there.
We got to start just because the cast is incredible. Before we get too deep into it, let's talk about some of the ones we've met so far. Ellen Wong as Knives Chow. I think I slept on her performance the first time I saw it. I think she does a great job.
What a sympathetic character.
Such a good job that it really underscores how much I viscerally dislike Scott Pilgrim because of the way he treats her.
Exactly.
I didn't like it in the comic either. Don't get me wrong. That was one of the reasons I really struggled with the early issues of the comic. But it just really drives that home. And it's such a tough place to start a movie with a character that like you're really not going to like.
She is like the most sympathetic character in the movie. You feel for her the entire way. She's the best person in the movie, like in terms of personality and like the things that they do, the action.
She's so nice, and like everybody treats her so shitty. It feels like like they treat her like she's uncool,
like she's innocent, and they're all like jaded assholes.
Like she genuinely loves their music and stuff, and they're like whatever, I don't know. It's so frustrating.
But it is reminiscent of assholes in real life that are just like that kind of people.
So let's talk about Michael Cera a little bit as Scott Pilgrim. What did you think?
So the first time I saw this movie, I didn't like the casting choice, and I think the performance. The thing that bothered me wasn't the performance. I think it's just odd casting overall. I like it now. Like I've come around on it, and I think he has a good performance. Like I think a lot of the things that he was asked to do were difficult, and I think he does them well. But something about I don't know. I remember watching Arrested Development as it was coming out, and like that is who I remember Michael Cera as. And then like seeing him in this, I think immediately after that was tough for me. But I think like I said, I think I've come around on it at this point, and I actually really I think it's one of his better performances that I've seen of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not someone who's seen a lot of Michael Cera performances. I'm sure I've seen a few others, but I think he was cast, because he's really good at certain things, right? Like he's really good at delivering a certain kind of line, at being just like a goof but still likable, and that is like an essential part of Scott Pilgrim. But in other ways, it is a really difficult casting for me. And I think it really suffers in the sense that you're lining him up with a collection of women who are in another stratosphere than him. I'm not, not to put too fine a point on it, but
I think that's the point of the story a little bit, though, right? Like
a little bit
out of his league.
I think women who watch this movie are rightfully going to look at it and go like, this guy is getting this reaction from anybody? I don't understand what's happening. And that really drives home the wish fulfillment part of it too, right? Like the idea that he is going to have these women just like all lusting after him is so wild. And like the comic book version of the character, you can kind of imprint anybody onto. Like he can be like, I don't know. Whereas Michael Cera is Michael Cera, you know what I mean? So like you have to like ask yourself, can you believe it? Can you believe that Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Ellen Wong, Brie Larson, like all these women are somehow attracted to and still like almost obsessed with Michael Cera? It's difficult.
It is difficult.
And I feel bad because I'm not trying to like cast aspersions on Michael Cera, because it's not just Michael Cera. It's Michael Cera behaving in the way that Scott Pilgrim behaves. It's those two things together. You know what I mean? It's not like he's, winning people over with his charm in this, because he's not really that charming in this movie.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's tough to really talk about, because I feel bad, because I feel like I'm bad mouthing Michael Cera, but I'm really not trying to do that. It just feels like a difficult cast for me.
And I agree with you. I think he plays the awkward moments well. I think he plays a lot of the comedy well. I think like I said, I think the performance is difficult to pull off. And I think the things that he's asked to do are tough, and I think he pulls them off. But like you said, I guess there is a little unbelievability there.
Yeah.
But I guess there are people that are going to be willing to be like, that's part of the story, and there are going to be people who like, I feel like that was part of my initial reaction as well, right? Is like, he just doesn't fit what I feel like the character should be if he's going to be an asshole for a lot of it, and I don't know. But and it's brought to everybody's attention that like, she says like, you're the nicest, like Ramona says like, you're the nicest person I've ever dated, and like he's clearly a departure from the type of guys that she typically likes. But I don't know, it's still kind of tough to,
is he
to
though?
jump on.
Because he's really not nice, and typically to get away with some of the shit that he gets away with, you kind of have to be immensely conventionally attractive. Like those are the guys who get away with doing some of the shit that he does in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, all right, 10 minutes of Michael Cera talk is enough, I feel
anyway,
like.
Let's move
let's
on.
go to...
There's so many other great
Kieran
people.
Culkin I thought was incredible.
Amazing. Like, what a great
it.
role for him. And I had no idea that this was someone related to Macaulay Culkin, but when I saw that, I was like, oh, of course, that's why he looks so goddamn familiar, and I couldn't place him.
He really does. He's in that movie, or he's in that show on HBO, Succession, that I haven't watched yet, and everybody's been telling me is like one of the best shows on TV, so shame on me for not seeing it yet.
Yeah. As Wallace, who one of my other favorite characters in the comic. Again, his sexuality is not very well handled here. It is again played as a joke pretty much throughout the entire movie. He is like over the top, like promiscuous, like he's sleeping with multiple guys at the same time, and everything about him is about him being gay. Like that's really what it is. Like, I don't care about that. It's fine. But like everything, people's whole identity isn't revolve around their sexuality. That's just one piece of it.
Yeah. I just kept feeling like a lot of the jokes landed as like, he would be like calling people gay and be like, what are you, gay? Like it kept being a joke.
Oh yeah.
It was like, and I was like, I just was like, this is not natural. It's not the kind of thing that someone would say. Like,
but anyway. What about Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who I am a huge fan of as Ramona Flowers here?
I mean, to be honest, I had a massive crush on her. She's amazing performer. Like I think I remember one of the first things I saw her in was like Sky High. And I remember being like of an age where I was like, she I don't know. I just like had a crush on her. And then she was Ramona Flowers in this. And I was like, again. And then, she was in Fargo. She was in 10 Cloverfield Lane. She consistently was in like fantastic work. Mm-hmm. And she's great. So
I agree. Big fan. Like, she's perfectly plays the dream girl here, like excellently cast. She really like, it's like, I can't believe how well cast, like how well she fits Ramona from the comic is kind of incredible.
Yeah. And even the moments that like, I feel like would be tough to play, where she's like playing this like aloof sort of loner, it's like it and specifically for that time, it's like, it's almost like charming and like endearing, and you're like, I don't know, you're drawn to it because of that all the culture at that time was very much about like, I don't know, mystery and like being easily cool. You know what I mean? Like she just is cool.
Yeah,
and I think that's a lot.
Yeah,
effortlessly cool.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, Anna Kendrick as Stacy Pilgrim, and this is like
standout. Like I like the sister character in the comics, but I thought she really brought something to the role that wasn't even there.
Yeah, and again, Anna Kendrick's amazing. She's like after this movie, and then I know she was in Twilight, but then she went on to like completely break out and have her own like amazing career. And she's also like this whole cast is insane, and this is the kind of stuff that I feel like certain filmmakers can like see someone and like just see the charisma that they exude and like somehow enhance that and put that on film. And I think like just looking at this cast, are like, holy shit, like some of these people are like just about to blow up in their careers.
Aubrey Plaza.
Yeah, Aubrey
she
Plaza.
Was great, man. Like the cursing with the little black box.
So funny.
So funny. And then I loved how Scott even says, like, how are you doing that with your mouth? You know, like calling attention to it, which is really funny.
Again, just about to blow up. She may have been in Parks and Rec at this point, but she like, look at her career at this point.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Massive. Oh, so because we were just talking about Ramona, I want to back up and talk about her a little bit more. And I actually want to introduce. We had someone write in, one of our patrons who is at a tier where they can ask specific questions for us to read. And one of her questions is about Ramona, so I want to go ahead and jump right to that, and then we can discuss. So Paula asks, Ramona is often seen as your typical quote manic pixie dream girl, in that she is spontaneous, alternative, and mysterious woman entering the life of the more, quote, bland male character. Do you think this trope holds in her case? Like, does she fit this trope in the movie?
In the movie? Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And, not just because she actually shows up in the dream, but one thing I do, because I talked about the Manic Pixie trope last week, and I kind of fell down a rabbit hole, like reading about it and watching some videos about it and thinking about the trope more. And it has become almost like the Mary Sue criticism that you see thrown around a lot. The Manic Pixie Dream Girl was originally a trope people identified to point out that like a woman in this role has very little agency, has very little things that they actually want in their life, and it's basically just a created to serve the male character's growth, right? And can often be a very empty performance. But what's happened is it's become a cudgel that people wield at any time they see a character who's quirky, or anytime they see a character who has different hair colors or something. Like, you can have a quirky character who isn't a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, and it can be a quirky love interest too. So people will level this accusation at a character like Clementine in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and I don't think it applies at all. I can't remember the name of the character, but Zooey Deschanel's character in 500 Days of Summer, for example, often people call Manic Pixie Dream Girl, but she really isn't. And there's a lot of people talking about like why that is. If you really want to do more research into it, definitely Google it and look up some of the stuff you can find out there on like YouTube is excellent. But I just wanted to like talk about that trope a little bit, in the sense that like it does, I think, apply here. Especially because we see Ramona as reduced to an object in a way that is even worse than it was in the comic. And you could maybe argue that the comic character has some more like personal growth, a character arc, wants and desires that exist outside of Scott Pilgrim, but it's difficult to make that argument for the character that we see in this film. So in that case, I think it does apply here, even though I recognize now that trope is in itself has become kind of a thing that is difficult to use because people mischaracterize characters as that so often.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess I kind of always thought that most of her in this film is to service, like, she is the prize to be won in terms of Scott Pilgrim's like perspective. And like, she has her own arc that she goes through. Obviously we can see the growth in the character. And she has agency. She does fight for herself. She does eventually, break free of Gideon in ways. But like, just the way that like, it's like, I think a Manic Pixie Dream Girl to me is like, so someone who would typically date the norm of what is expected within society, then kind of shifting and being like, this is the person who's alternative, and they're sort of like, they lead such an interesting and exotic life in comparison to mine, that they're this like they're different to me, and they're what I need right now.
Yeah,
and,
they're going to bring some color and liveliness to your otherwise boring, bland office job.
And I feel like that is in Ramona in this story, basically.
But that setup, I think that's like a cliched setup, but the character itself could be done well and could still be a person who has their own desires and their own agency within the story, because that's kind of what 500 Days of Summer is about, honestly. Is about the expectation of one character thinks he's getting one thing, and then she, something. Have you seen that movie?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's my memory of it, at least. But or Clementine in Eternal Sunshine is, again, like almost playing against that trope. But here we don't see it really played against, and in fact, the Gideon stuff at the end, I thought was some of the worst, and it was some of the biggest changes too. Was Ramona is almost like magnetically drawn to him. She literally leaves Scott for him, and then we see her like sitting at his feet now it does come out of the comic, but in the comic it was only in her like subconscious. It wasn't happening in real life. And I know these things blend, but it is important to note, for those of you who haven't read the comic, that Ramona leaves Scott and he thinks she's gone to Gideon, but he goes and finds out she's not actually with Gideon, and he like pulls her through subspace to be there, and she says that she's been with like her parents or something for a month, like finding herself. Like she didn't go back to Gideon at all. That's directly changed. She can't control herself around Gideon. In fact, he has like a chip in her head, and she like just goes to him in the film in a way that felt like a complete betrayal of her character. It stripped her of all agency. It said that her romantic life was completely at the whim of the male characters, including Gideon and including Scott. And it frustrated me. That was like one of the changes that frustrated me the most.
Yeah, I mean, the ending, honestly, and like, it's not to take away from any of the filmmaking techniques or anything, any of the choreography nearing the ending, but like the third act of this movie is kind of the least interesting part to me. And like some of that plays into that. Like definitely it feels really dirty. It feels really icky that like, it's just like, I don't know, it's ownership to the max. Like this is already a story that sort of plays with that, but then like, it's like, full on like servitude almost, like and it's gross. So we'll get to that scene here in a little bit. Let's read some more synopsis and move along here. Scott finally breaks up with Knives, who blames Ramona and swears to win him back. Meanwhile, Scott proceeds to get attacked by and defeats the next 3 of Ramona's exes: Hollywood actor and skateboarder Lucas Lee, superpowered vegan Todd Ingram, and lesbian ninja Roxy Richter, while also confronting his own ex, pop star Envy Adams. However, Scott grows frustrated during the process, and after an outburst regarding Ramona's dating history, she breaks up with him.
Yeah. We got to move through each one of those. First off, Chris Evans.
Yeah. What a fucking unbelievable performance, right? Like,
well, and amazing to think about where he is now.
Yeah.
Versus this was probably what, like Fantastic 4 days, I assume?
No, I mean this was right before Captain America.
Right before? Okay. So he's about to just take off, into Marvel stratosphere. Same with Brie Larson, obviously, that we see later. It's like all of these characters, or all these actors, are now in Marvel movies and just some of the biggest A-listers in the world.
Well, like Brie Larson we'll get to for sure, but like she won an Oscar. Like she then she became Captain Marvel and some other stuff. So like she's had an amazing career beyond this, and I love Edgar stays really tight with a lot of these people that he's worked with, and I love like when she won the Oscar, I can remember. And by the way, follow Edgar Wright on Twitter. He's a great follow. Just in general, he's just a fascinating person and super cool. Again, great taste in life.
And you love him. You're in love with him.
And I love him. Yeah. So I remember when she won, him being like, "Oh my God, Envy Adams won an Oscar," and did all this stuff, and just being like really excited about the ways that he was able to at least like interact with her in life, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah, that's cool.
So,
but Chris Evans here is playing he's playing a role that honestly, I mean, I guess he could still do it, because like you look at his character in Knives Out, and he plays a kind of a really douchey character, so he can still do it. But like this is so diametrically opposed to what he becomes with Captain America. It's really funny to see.
100%, yeah, and like the the actor thing that's happening within all of these scenes and the way that they're on a set, and like I just love all
the
the
stunt
stuff.
the stunt fighters,
doubles.
the stunt doubles
Yeah.
showing up was hilarious. Yeah, I loved
All
it.
of that stuff is really funny. Specifically, like when a filmmaker does something like film related in their movie, it always tends to be really funny with inside stuff.
Yeah, it works. It works better than it did in the comic. I'll definitely give it the shout out here. Like this was an improvement. Like this was great.
Yeah. Chris Evans just kills it. Like you said, the character in Knives Out eventually becomes like an asshole as well. But this guy's like the ultimate asshole. He's just like nothing but like a tool. Like he's just a big tool.
Yeah, it's the worst, but it's so funny.
It really is.
And even funnier now than it would have been at the time. You know?
Yeah. I mean, and like Captain America, I've talked a few times about Captain America, but like
Snowpiercer, we talk about Chris Evans quite a bit.
Yeah. So anyway, Captain America is great. That's my short way of talking about that. And then we get to superpowered vegan Todd Ingram with Envy Adams and all the stuff that happens with that.
Yeah, and you know who shows up to arrest him? Miller from the fucking Expanse. What?
Well, you mean the Punisher, right? The Punisher.
The Punisher. Thomas Jane. Well, I just couldn't believe the like familiar faces I was seeing. The guy he's with, I don't know the name of the actor, but he was in The Stand recently that we saw.
He was, yeah. He's been in a lot of he's one of those actors.
The familiar faces
in
this movie is astounding.
Yeah. Character actors.
Yeah, the vegan stuff we talked about a lot last week, and I don't want to rehash it all here, but it's definitely it's just like there are some holier than thou vegans, I'm sure, but the way that veganism is just completely played as like a farce and a laugh is not necessarily great, but I don't know.
It's funny, but at the same time, it's completely like a stereotype, and like veganism is to be seen as something, you know, like if everyone was a little bit more vegan and everyone went, more vegan, it would be a good thing for us in general. So like, it's not really something to be made.
World, that's true.
It's not a great thing to like super make fun of, but like, you know, I understand like playing off the existing stereotype to an extent.
Yeah.
But yeah, so how about the stuff with Envy Adams and everything?
She's great. I mean, Brie Larson's great, and
that song that she sings is the one. That's the song that really sticks in my brain.
Did she actually sing that? I didn't think so. Right? Like that's a different band they brought in.
I actually don't know. I know there were a lot of musicians that came on board. I know, like Edgar.
I don't think that's actually her, but I guess I can't swear to it. I don't know, but she's someone who we should talk about a little bit because I feel like she gets a lot of hate online. A lot of people really don't like her.
Well, it's bullshit. It's
a
all
lot of it's
like
bullshit.
A lot of it leads back to the Captain Marvel stuff, and people are. I think a lot of like the outspoken like vocal minority that of like comic book readers and stuff that like see a character. Or I don't even want to give it to comic book readers really, even because like comic book readers know who Captain Marvel is and understand Captain Marvel within the universe. Like it's like I don't know who it is really, but it's these assholes that exist out there that are so they're whether I don't know what it is. They're so hateful, or their masculinity is so fragile that seeing a powerful female character and a woman who has agency in her life and a woman who's successful and like great at her craft and all of these things are so intimidating that they feel like they have to cut her down every step of the way.
And I think that's really what it is. Like it's the combination, right? It's you have a powerful character, but then you have a person who is unapologetic, isn't looking for like male approval, you know, doesn't give a fuck about it, and you know, it's like, you know, openly feminist and all these things, and then you have them come in and play a powerful character who kicks the ass of a bunch of like, you know, male stars, and that's just like the perfect storm for these kinds of people to get incredibly mad about. And it's a shame, you know, she doesn't deserve it. It's super
dumb. What a dumb thing to like focus your time on. Like,
and people say that she's not likable in real life and all this shit, and it's like, it's so fucking what? Like, it's a standard that is not ever applied to men.
Exactly.
It's complete horseshit, and she's awesome in this movie, and she's been awesome in everything I've seen her in.
Yeah, she's amazing. The scenes that they have together are great. I felt like we didn't get the full in-depth arc of Envy like we had in the comic, but it was still nice to see, like, if you know that information. That's another thing I wanted to say, is that like Edgar was also making this for the people who were the fans of the comics. Like, there's a lot that's threaded in that you're not going to pick up on unless you've read the comic.
I missed the 6th issue Envy Adams stuff though. You know, there was a lot that went down with her that is just omitted from the film.
For sure.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean, it was cool, you know, and she's a very interesting character, and he does a good job with the stuff that lines up with the earlier issues of Envy Adams.
Yeah. I guess on that note, I do want to say that, like, you know, this is a genre film, and typically, like, that's like people are interested in going to see genre films in general. But I think something notable about this story, and then honestly, a lot of Edgar Wright's work, is like the way that he finds moments to give depth to these characters, in ways like quiet moments, small mannerisms, small, like the things that he does to like build a character in such an efficient way. Like, I feel like, of course, I missed some of the stuff that we got that was like directly backstory of Envy, but we still understood the character, and I think she still had depth. But specifically, what I'm talking about is like there are moments of like the conversation between like Scott and his sister on the swings. I thought was like one of the best scenes in the movie, because it's like, in order to see Scott's arc, that scene is so pivotal, and it plays out so well, and it is still funny, and it's like heartwarming, and it's got the emotion built in there as well, which, like, I think that's like a scene to be proud of in terms of like having more than just the genre elements that I think people get caught up in with this movie.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I remember being a little frustrated because it felt like they had taken Kim's scene from the comics and given it to the sister. The scenes play out differently, though.
Yeah,
you know, so
there is a bit of that
really
going on, too, though. Like, certain characters will say lines that other characters did in the comic. Some things were shifted like that. How about Roxy Richter and all the stuff that goes on with?
I've seen it called biphobic, and that was a word I wasn't pulling, but like it absolutely is, because... And this is something that happens throughout, and I think that really encapsulates what I was having a problem with in the comics. And there were these moments of like bisexuality with especially the women characters, and it was never seen as like a serious thing. It was always seen as like frivolous or a joke or something that isn't actually a threat to Scott, who's, you know, hoping to get these women. And it was never pursued seriously. And then the one character we get who is a lesbian is, you know, it's played for laughs. They're kind of ridiculous. The way that she's bested with the touch in the back of the leg and stuff, it's really cringy. And I think you picked up on this in the comics. Ramona telling her it was only a phase and stuff like that. It's hurtful, honestly, and it kind of erases the idea that someone could be bisexual and date a man. Like, that's fine. She doesn't have to say that it's not something that was real for her.
Yeah, and I do have this leads me to another point that I had. Because the X's are so over the top and dramatized, it doesn't help that like Matthew Patel is one of the only people of color that we see in the movie, and then it's like over dramatized, and then there's like a Bollywood dancing fight scene that seems offensive in ways, and then there's like
because I know it's from the comic, but something about the way it's presented does feel off.
And it kept happening with the characters, right? Like with her being bisexual, or with this character either being a lesbian or bisexual, it felt like there was like all these like bi-curious like wordplay jokes, and like it feels like I know that they're trying to go to 11, and it's all jokes and everything like that, but like because these characters are like not represented very often, now that they are in this movie, they're like the way over the top extreme versions of anything you could and a lot of it's just played for laughs. So you know, I think I give equal blame to the comic and the movie in this situation, just because like a lot of it is pulled from the comic.
That's true.
But like we said before, this movie is definitely not perfect. The story's not perfect, and there are things in it that are just like, I don't know, very much a white specifically male perspective film, and like anything that's not that, I could totally see people being turned off and be like, what the fuck are they doing to, you know, what I identify with.
Yeah. I mean, and you pointed it out, and I think it is worth saying that there's not a single black person in this movie that I can remember.
Not that I can remember either.
At all.
Yeah.
That does seem like a bit of a problem. But anyway, what's next? You get some more summary?
At the next battle of the band, Sex Bomb defeats Ramona's 5th and 6th evil exes, Kyle and Ken Katanayagi, earning Scott an extra life. Despite this, Ramona appears to get back with her with her seventh evil ex, Gideon. Sex Bomb accepts Gideon's record deal, except for Scott, who quits the band in protest. Gideon invites Scott to his venue, the Chaos Theater, where Sex Bomb is playing. Resolving to win Ramona back, Scott challenges Gideon to a fight for her affection, earning the Power of Love sword. Knives interrupts the battle, attacking Ramona, and Scott is forced to reveal that he cheated on both of them. Gideon kills Scott, and Ramona visits him in limbo to reveal that Gideon has implanted her with a mind control device. Scott uses his one-up and re-enters the Chaos Theater. He makes peace with his friends and challenges Gideon again, this time for himself, gaining the Power of Self-Respect sword. After apologizing to Ramona and Knives for cheating on them, and accepting his own faults, Scott and Knives join forces to defeat Gideon. Free from Gideon's control, Ramona prepares to leave. Knives accepts that her relationship with Scott is over, and at her encouragement, he leaves with Ramona to try again.
Yeah, weakest part of the movie, in my opinion. And another change I have to point out, the sword of self-respect does not work nearly as well as the sort of understanding that he gets.
I don't understand that change. Yeah, why not the
I
sword
don't think
of
it probably didn't exist yet. You know what I mean? This is something that was being written simultaneously.
Maybe right.
But the self-respect just didn't make sense to me. Like, that wasn't his problem. You know, like,
well, it was like he was like, I mean, in terms of like the actual weapon, like he's like, I'm doing it for me, not for anyone else, which is like a healthy thing to do, and it is like, you know, taking responsibility for yourself.
Yeah.
So I guess I can understand self-respect in that sense, but like that's not his character. But that's not his character's arc that he's going on, right? It's not that he doesn't have self-respect.
Yeah. But so in the comic, it's that he understands what he's done and the mistakes that he's made. Right. And we don't get that.
It's not about himself. It's about everyone else. You know what I mean? It should be about him understanding everything else that he's done, but it's instead in the movie, it's like directly like...
He's like, I'm doing this for me, instead of like, I understand how I have contributed to all the problems that I have.
Exactly.
You know, anyway, it's a small distinction, but it doesn't... Yeah, let's jump back. Go ahead.
Let's jump back. So Sex Bomb defeats Ramona's 5th and 6th evil exes at the Battle of the Bands.
I wasn't a big fan of this scene. Like, I see what he was going for, but this is one of like really two times in this section where I felt like Edgar Wright was trying to like push the envelope of what he could get away with. And I think he's still like figuring it out, like, it's early in his career of like, what can I really pull over on the audience and have them still follow me? And the big dragons versus the big ape and you know what I mean? Like it just didn't quite work for me. It goes on a little bit too long, and it was one of the few times where I felt like maybe this is a little too much style, and we needed to dial it back a hair.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think ultimately I do enjoy it. I do think that there's not... These characters are like... These characters that he's fighting, there's no motivation. There's nothing... They're literally nothing. Just cardboard characters that he's fighting because they're enemies that he has to fight. So like a lot of it isn't motivated, and that feels like a bummer because like... You know, why are we invested in this fight, really?
Yeah. They don't get any backstory, I don't think, right? Like, all the other exes get backstory, but not them.
I did read that some of that had to be cut for time and some other stuff like that. That like,
sense.
Those were the sacrifices that were made. Were like these characters here, and maybe he thought, like you said, in this case, like substance and style here overcomes maybe having to tell a story with what's going on with these characters. But you know. Ultimately, like, I respect the fact that like we really wanted to make a lot of these fight scenes interesting, and he went with something weird here. I agree. Like, I kind of do think like from here to the end of the movie, it sort of like spins its wheels. It doesn't know exactly specifically how to land some of these beats, and honestly, maybe that has something to do with the fact that like it was unwritten and Edgar was having to write it himself, and it's not his story that he was telling all the way through.
Yeah.
So
that could be part of it for sure.
So yeah, let's talk about Gideon.
He again is kind of weak for me. He's not much better in the comic, but he kind of shows up out of nowhere and to be the big bad, and he behaves in ways that are very like mustache twirly villain, which is okay. It's just not super interesting. I don't know. Like, there was a potential here to have the final X be more of a human being. And like, what would that have created? You know, I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but like, he doesn't go that route in either version. And Gideon is just garbage, right? Like he's the worst person you meet.
I'll give Jason Schwartzman the benefit of the doubt. Like I love Jason Schwartzman. Like I love him in everything he's done for the most part. The
performance was good. You know, it's just the character.
But overall, not a ton to do here. Kind of the big bad, and like I think we felt the same way in the comic too, right? Like it just like ultimately didn't live up to the sort of what we would have liked to have seen from a final situation. Yeah. Stylish and some interesting cool visuals and some stuff going on there, but ultimately like it wasn't like the knockout that it could have been, the home run that it could have been.
So in the final fight versus Gideon, Scott dies and then he comes back. We see Knives come in and fight on his side, which was a change. I thought it was kind of fun, but it did kind of steal thunder a little bit from Ramona, who is the one who fights by Scott's side throughout the end of the comic. And she does a little bit of fighting, don't get me wrong, but it's partially against Knives, and I don't know, it gets a little messy, and again it shows just how much they undercut any sort of agency she might have had by the end here. And I know it feels like we're using a buzzword and saying agency over and over again, but truly when we say that, we're talking about a character having the impetus and the ability to move the plot to serve their own desires, and the way that people in real life are able to affect the outcome of things because they have goals and they pursue them. And the characters who are able to do that are said to have agency in a story, and Ramona has none really here at the end. Yeah.
Part of me felt like I liked seeing Knives have more to do.
Yeah.
I liked that Knives sort of in this way was so, I don't know. So there's two things that we're going to have to talk about here. So one of them is there are multiple endings that we'll get to. And like having Knives be a part of the ending in this significant of a way, I think leans heavily on one ending and doesn't make as much sense with the ending that we ultimately get.
Like maybe there was a leftover, yeah.
And again, I just think that like having them dance, which is a callback to them dating and the dance in the ninja game that they were playing together, Scott and him and her. I think that is like directly leading to like their relationship, and I get that it's some sort of closure that's happening potentially with the ending that we get, but it did feel like it's a moment for Ramona and he to come together and win together. And
I do like Knives saying I'm too cool for you. I think that was in the comic too. There are certain things that it was good, and one of the other things I was getting around to talking about with the ending was this is another moment where I felt like it just needed like to take just a hair of the foot off the gas with this final fight in the all the like special effects, like flashing video game referencing, comic bookiness stuff, like
swooshy.
It got to be so much at times that like I felt disconnected completely from what was happening on screen. And unfortunately, when you're in the climax of your film, like you need to care about what's happening. And I felt like I was disconnecting from it because of it, and I'm sure that tastes will vary on that. But for me, it felt like this is one of maybe a couple times in this film where Edgar Wright was going to be going a bit too heavy on it.
Yeah, and honestly, to talk about that a little bit, it's like the want to have everything happen in camera and then be augmented is clearly seen, I think, in a lot of these shots and a lot of the things that happen here. And some of it works and some of it doesn't. There are moments when people are like take damage and they're like blinking red, and I don't know that worked extremely well. It kind of hurts your eyes to look at it in some ways. And then like there are moments
he was going for broke on this. You know what I mean? Like he went so hard on it.
They went super video gamey, and like I respect it. I think it's great, but ultimately, like I can totally understand. I think it still works for me, but I understand if people are like, yeah, it totally doesn't work. And I do again say that like the third act here, it's a culmination of a lot of things, and this is part of the reason why I feel like it is. It's not quite the home run that I wish that it was. You know, I think the last bit.
And I know we've been very critical, but like I hope, listener, that you get that both James and I obviously had a great time, and like the style on display is fun, and we're kind of nitpicking, but you can still say that something is fun and interesting, yet it can kind of undercut the drama of the final scene. And I know this isn't like the crazy most dramatic movie ever, but you still need to have that, like, the audience needs to feel invested in what's happening. And in my opinion, it just kind of distances itself a little bit. But you referenced two endings earlier, and we have a question about that I want to read and we can talk about. But we are going to, at the end of this, cast a vote on whether or not the comics or the film was better. So I want you to start thinking about that, because I know sometimes I don't want to blindside you with that. Okay, so Paula asks, what do you think about the changed ending? I remember the first time I watched the movie, there was one ending, and then the second time they had released a new cut and the ending was different. It concerns who the main character ends up with. I don't want to spoil it for anyone. Well, we already have. I can imagine that people were not happy with the first ending and were rooting for the second type of ending. So you sent me, they have the original ending as a deleted scene that you can just watch on YouTube. You sent it to me and we both watched it before we got on here. I had never seen that original ending. I couldn't remember if I had, but watching what you sent me, I was like, nope, this is not familiar. Had you ever seen it before when you watched it?
I think I had, because I own the Blu-ray and I like to, go into bonus features and stuff.
But do you remember if that was the ending you saw it?
No.
Okay. So it sounds like Paola did.
So.
Like, she actually saw the original ending, which is, you want to describe what actually happens in the deleted ending, the original ending?
So I guess for clarity's sake, we kind of talked about the ending, but basically the one that we watched, the actual theatrical version, that is the finalized version now, Scott comes out after, having a conversation with Nega Scott.
Oh, yeah. Nega Scott, who, but just real quickly, I don't like that it was sort of reduced to just a pure joke in this version. Like, it shows no self-growth. Instead, he just kind of embraces the, like, shitty parts of himself and is like, cool guy, I love him.
Honestly, didn't think of it that way. I kind of thought of it as, like, he bested it by being, like, friends with it and realizing, like, he should be better than that. I don't know.
Oh, interesting. But I read it more as just like, oh yeah, love this shitty version of myself. He's a cool guy. We're gonna have tea later or whatever he says.
So anyway, he comes out and Knives and Ramona are there, and I think in the version that we get, he has a conversation with Knives. He comes out, they have a nice interaction, and then
she tells him that
he goes up to Ramona. He goes up to Ramona and then basically is like, this is goodbye. And then she says this is goodbye and she walks away, and then he talks again with Knives, and then she's like, what are you doing? Go get her.
Yeah.
Scott runs after Ramona, and then they end up together, and Scott and Ramona end up together.
They go through the door, much like the end of the comic. And it's important. I think Knives, like, they really do have, like, a nice moment where they have they reconcile over what happened. And I think Scott somewhat appreciates that he was shitty to her, and she's able to tell him, like, it's okay, I'm over it, go do your thing. And it leads to that final moment where he gets with Ramona, which, that lines up with the comic, and that way it lines up with the comic that they end up together. And then the original version,
the alternate version, what we consider the alternate version now, Scott comes out, has a conversation with Knives, goes up to similar conversation with Knives, walks up to Ramona and says, this is goodbye. They both say their goodbyes. They part ways and they're walking away. It's sort of like a bittersweet, like, they love each other, but they're parting ways because they feel like it's better for them to be individuals and understand themselves as individuals. And then Scott walks back and then ends up with Knives. They puts his arm around her and they walk off. Now, just as the right away reaction from me, I hated the idea of Knives ending up with him, because he was terrible to Knives.
Yep.
The entire time, and there's no redeeming that relationship for me.
Yep, I completely agree. The only thing I can see is that Edgar Wright was trying to subvert expectations with Ramona. It was more about Ramona, I think, and it was about, like, she has been stripped of all agency, like we talked about, and this is a moment for her to, like, go find herself and to not end up with anybody.
I actually do think I like that for her character.
Yeah, I can see why you would go that route. But ultimately, like, this whole movie and this whole story is this romance between the two of them, and to undercut that at the end so I know a lot of romance writers who talk about this, and they write the romance genre. and this is a massive genre. It makes up for like half of all book sales is romance, right? And one of the things that will talk about is how there are certain rules that romance readers are non-negotiable. And one of them, and it depends on like the subgenre sometimes, but one of the major ones is happily ever afters. It has to happen, and if you do not deliver the happily ever after at the end of your book, people will review bomb you, will never read another thing you do. It's bad. Don't do it. There's a certain contract that certain genres have. And I'm not saying this is a romance in the same way, but it kind of is. And we've built up this contract watching the movie to where it feels like we've been completely misled if they don't wind up together. It just does.
Yeah. And I understand that as well. Like that makes a lot of sense to me. But part of me also likes Ramona. Part of me also likes both characters. It's real, right? It's more real. So it's like
I can see why you would think it might be a good idea. But it's
to have both characters like individually say like we're both pieces of shit. We love each other, but we're like it's better if we sort of.
Ramona has some problems. I wouldn't call her that, but like Scott, absolutely. If Ramona was just like, actually, you're a piece of shit. I'm out of here. That would be understandable.
Yeah, I guess I just mean like both people understand like that they're like not ready, whether they're ready to be in a relationship together or not, or if it's not going to work out, but to be big enough to say like, this was fun what we had, but let's part ways and like go on with our lives, and we'll find people eventually, that kind of thing. It's a pretty real thing to happen, and like I understand that sort of ending as well, but again, hated it for Knives, so it kind of negates it all for me.
Yeah, also, I mean, she's 17, she doesn't turn 18 in the movie, which is a thing that happens in the comic, but I don't know that really makes it much better. So it's still also that it's inappropriate. I think Scott in the film is 22. And then the idea that they're going to wind up together still, it's like that problem still exists. It's still creepy. And I don't know. It's just, it leans into that, and they try and make it touching if you watch the deleted scene. But it didn't really work for me. And it's tough too, because I really love Knives as a character, and I want her to be happy, but I don't think she needs to be happy without Scott.
I think she's happier without Scott in the long run, honestly.
Like, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because like I mean, like he's gonna feel this way until the next girl comes through his dream, and then he's gonna do the same shit. Like I didn't get the impression this version of Scott had really learned a lot. Whereas, at least in the comic, I felt like he had learned something. This version of Scott,
but he has the power. What are you talking about? He has the power of self-respect. How does that not clearly say that he has growth?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's just differences, and it's really interesting that they released the film with this version of the ending, and then later changed it after there was an uproar.
It could have been a situation where it was like a deal breaker for him or something, and he was like, "I'm standing my ground on this kind of scene," and then ultimately it just didn't play out how he thought it would or whatever.
I don't know. Yeah,
some of this stuff is tough.
I think we're ready to take our vote, right? To decide.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, do you want to go first?
You go first. I know what I want. I've already chosen it in my mind, so go for it.
All right, fair enough. I really enjoyed the comics. I went on a real journey with them. Going from dislike to like into I would dare say almost love. Not love, but almost love. I really enjoyed them by the end. I was having a great time. This movie was like kind of that too, but throughout, in that there was things I absolutely adored and things that I really didn't like. So stylish, so fun. Love Edgar Wright. I want to give it to the movie, but I can't. In this situation, I'm gonna have to be that like classic comic book guy and say that I think the comics are better. I just kind of do. Like, I think the ending was better, and I really give a lot of points to a good ending. But I can't fault anyone who just loves this movie for the innovation that it is. And I do too. But if I had to pick one, I'm gonna give it to the comics.
It was honestly closer than I thought it would be for me, because it's an Edgar Wright film. But I really enjoyed the comics. Like I had a great time reading the comics. Like you said, I think I did go on a journey. And by the end, we thought like Bryan Lee O'Malley, as much as like maybe the ending didn't like perfectly land in every way, he did get better as time went on. Like there's something about the story, the way that he was telling the story, and some of the best art in his comics were nearing the end. So I thought a lot of that stuff was great. In terms of being a biased film guy, I'm gonna have to take the movie in this case because it is so stylized. It's a movie unlike any you've seen. It's at least very few that you've seen. It's hard for me to put into words, but basically like having the specific elements that Edgar Wright, he's pulling from film history, he's pulling from gritty like indie films, he's pulling from massive blockbuster films. He's doing all of these things. He's juggling all these different types of works, and then somehow creating something that's like wholly his own, and then and have it still be so well thought out in terms of like what is interesting to an audience member, specifically what is interesting to someone who cares about these properties, like things that are like to write a letter to Nintendo who are historically extremely close to the chest with the things that they'll allow people to use. They'll pull YouTube videos off if you have streams sometimes of Nintendo games. At least a while back they were doing that. And for him to like reach out and be able to get a song from The Legend of Zelda, I think that's like one very small example, but like all of these things build up, and like getting a cast together that's this significant.
Incredible. And
getting all these people on board, and Bill Pope we didn't even talk about, but the director of photography is incredible, and he's worked with Edgar on a lot of his films. The look of the film, it's just like the way that they do a lot of things in camera we've talked about, whether it works perfectly or not. There's sort of like a young filmmaker, and I'm not even saying young in terms of Edgar Wright within his career at this point, but young filmmaker still playing with the form, still being like, we're going to do all of this because it's way more fun to do it in camera and way more fun to do it practically. And it's harkening back to, I was listening to an interview of him. He watched Evil Dead and he saw Sam Raimi at 18 years old create something in the woods with his friends and stuff, and like
crazy. That
sort of filmmaking being brought along with Edgar Wright, and Edgar Wright meaning what he means to me now, and seeing like he made films extremely young. The one that I talked about in 1995, A Fistful of Fingers, he was very, very young when he directed that, and he entered it into film festivals and all of that stuff, and it's got a cult following now, and you can see already the DNA of what he would create. So I'm just like, it's partially the filmmaker, and I am biased, and I don't necessarily think that the movie is like better. I think they're about the same as the comic and the movie, but in terms of like what the significance of a movie like this is when it's playing with the form, when it's doing things that only movies can do, I have to give it to the movie.
Completely understand. And in fact, I feel like that's only appropriate for this project. Split decision, which I thought we would have more of those than I feel like historically we've actually had, but I think it's always nice when we have that personally. If you enjoyed this, please let us know in the form of a rating and review. We haven't gotten any reviews on iTunes, Apple Podcasts in a while, and it's starting to give me anxiety. So help me out. Give me a review on there, man. Let me know that you guys are still listening on Apple.
And make sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at Ink to Film. And we have a Council of Inklings on Facebook where we post all kinds of stuff, movie news, everything else that's coming out. So go check those out.
Yeah, and if you want to become a patron and vote on our upcoming projects yourself, go to patreon.com/inktofilm and see all the different things we have on there. We just watched The Exorcist 2, The Heretic, and God, was it painful. And you can hear our pain.
Let's talk about films and what films can be, and compare The Exorcist 2 to Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Yeah, definitely check that out if you're a patron, and if you're not a patron, consider signing up, because I thought it was a lot of pain, but a lot of fun.
And thank you to Techno Axe for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, and we will be back next week with a project. I've already started reading a little bit, and I can just say that this is about as far from a Scott Pilgrim style story as you can get, so something completely different with Gillian Flynn, and next week with Gone Girl. And until next time,
thanks for listening.